Hello and welcome to Community Science for Kids, a webinar that is part of New York State Invasive Species Awareness Week. I am your humble host, Christy Sabins. I am the Stewardship Communications Coordinator for both the Lower Hudson Prism and the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference. And I'm so excited you're here today to learn how you can become a community scientist. So let's start with the basics. What is community science? Well, community science is open to anyone and everyone. It doesn't matter if you can identify a bird species from its call, name a tree from its bark, or use the Latin name for an insect. If you can count and use a camera, you can do community science. Community science is for everyone. Community science allows everyone, children included, to explore and engage. They explore through community science. Children experience and explore the process of inquiry and scientific investigation. It's experiential learning that helps kids become invested in the topic at hand. And again, not just kids, this is for adults too. Community science also helps children and adults engage with nature in a hands-on and focused way, giving them a sense of responsibility and sparking a passion for a particular cause. For example, help the bees, or eradicate invasive species, or protect bird migration. You take your pick. There are many ways that you can participate in community science. It's an opportunity for an ordinary person to study the natural world around them and send their observations to scientists. You could observe animals, climate, weather, plants, geology, astronomy, and so much more. The data you collect will help inform conservation decisions and efforts. Community science uses the collective strength of communities and the public to identify research questions, collect and analyze data, interpret results, make new discoveries, and develop technologies and applications, all to understand and solve environmental problems. So, in honor of New York Invasive Species Awareness Week, today we will be focusing on reporting invasive species. And we will see a few examples coming up. But before we get into that, why don't we define what an invasive species is? And in fact, before we even define that, let's start by going over the differences between native and non-native species. So native species are species indigenous to a region at the time of European settlement, aka they have been here before human introduction that we're aware of. And then there's non-native species that were accidental or purposeful introductions of a species. So on the left, we have our native spring ephemeral, which is Dutchman's breeches, an adorable flower whose seeds are dispersed by ants, fun fact. And on the right, we have invasive spirea, a non-native that was introduced through ornamental landscaping, which is a common story for many invasive species. Log that away. So, an invasive species, specifically, is a non-native species that can cause harm to the environment. That is the main difference here. It causes harm or can cause harm to the economy or to human health. The environment, the economy, or human health. It can include any kind of living organism, amphibian, plant, insect, fish, fungus, bacteria, or even an organism's seeds or eggs. Invasive species come from all around the world, but they don't necessarily need to come from another country or continent. It could be a species from the southeastern United States that moves to the northeast United States and then becomes a problem. So why are invasive species a threat? Well, invasive species affect nearly every aspect of our lives and are one of the greatest threats to New York's biodiversity. They cause or contribute to habitat degradation, the loss of native fish, wildlife, plant, and tree species, a decrease in recreational opportunities and income, crop damage, and diseases in humans and livestock, just to name a few. So we have here everyone's favorite insect, the spotted lanternfly. And as we know, they can create infestations of areas and they just become a really big nuisance, and they create sticky honeydew that attracts wasps, and they have the potential to harm other things in our economy. And this is an example of a species that we need to make sure we manage. Moving on. Invasive species characteristics. So an invasive species has no known local predators or healthy competition. If we go back to that spotted lanternfly, nothing necessarily eats that spotted lanternfly because Nothing learned that that was food. No animal looks at that and thinks, that's going to be yummy. They think, I'm not really sure what that is. I'm just going to leave it be and eat what I'm used to. So that is a problem. And that's why the spotted lanternfly populations explode and kind of get out of control. Invasive species generally have competitive advantages over local species. They respond better to changes in temperature and harsh environments. They have sometimes low nutritional value. That goes back to what I was saying before. Some animals look at species and don't really want to eat them or consume them because they aren't associated with nutrition. In terms of plants, they can populate disturbed soils quickly. And once established, invasives can keep native species from returning. And that's a really big problem for biodiversity, which we will get into right now. What is biodiversity? Well, let's have these adorable wild creatures native to New York State explain it. So what is biodiversity? Asked the eastern screech owl. Well, said the gray tree frog, how do we define it? It is, biodiversity refers to the total variety of life on Earth or the total variety of life in any given area. For our purposes, New York State. Who's included? Asks the North American porcupine. Well, the biodiversity of New York includes all the different species of animals, plants, fungi, and even microorganisms and bacteria living in the state, to say the least. Why is it important? Asked the sly red fox. Well, each species is a unique part of our natural world and cannot be replaced if lost. We rely on biodiversity for enjoyment, recreation, and spiritual fulfillment, to say a few things. For example, invasive species like this guy, the round goby, threaten biodiversity as they can take over the habitat and resources our native species depend on. That's why your local PRISM works hard to control the harmful impacts of invasive species, helping protect our region's biodiversity and ecosystems, says the eastern bumblebee. So going over how invasive species push out native species, well, here we have a wonderful example of kudzu, a vine that consumes everything in its path. And no, it's not actually eating anything, but it does grow so rapidly that anything that's in its path gets covered by all these vines, and then anything underneath no longer gets the sunlight it needs to thrive. Also, the vine is sucking out the resources from the ground and preventing other species from having those nutrients available to them. So that makes this one vine cover a whole area and nothing else is able to grow. Here's more example or more photographic evidence of kudzu. Here we have winter, spring, midsummer, early fall, and you can see how the vine looks as if it's eating a house because it is just growing and growing so rapidly that nothing has a chance to get in there and grow other than kudzu. So what we want to prevent is just that. We want to prevent invasive species like kudzu from overtaking our natural areas, and we want to protect the areas that are like this. This is a really healthy area with native ferns and native plants, full of native plants and flowers and creatures and birds and fish and amphibians, all of that. And it's all in balance because there are limited invasive species pushed into this ecosystem, and therefore the biodiversity balance is kept intact. And then we have these creatures that are able to thrive in these balanced ecosystems, like the swallowtail caterpillar. We have a eastern red-spotted newt in its red F stage. We have a barred owl to the right. All of these creatures and so many more depend on the balance that biodiversity creates, because one thing eats the other. And for example, the caterpillar eats the plants, the newt eats the insects, and the owl will eat the newt. And it's all connected into a food web, or the food chain. And this is all how things stay balanced. But when invasives are introduced and they push out those native species, those food webs are disrupted. And then these little creatures here, their food also gets disrupted and they have to move elsewhere. And then that's when biodiversity is impacted by that. So how do invasive species spread? Well, many ways, but they spread by dispersal by the wind and animals, including your pets, or water. They're spread by human activities such as intentional pet trade and ornamental planting. And then they're also spread by unintentionally spread when contained in plants, firewood, agricultural products, and shipping containers. That's why you always hear burning local firewood, because you don't want to take firewood that has an invasive like the emerald ash borer or hemlock woolly adelgid and bring it elsewhere when you go camping or you go on your trip, and then bring it to where it hasn't yet been established, and then you're introducing that invasive species into a pristine landscape. We do not want to do that. We want to prevent that. Speaking of prevention, here are 5 simple ways to prevent the spread of invasive species. Remove plants, animals, and mud from boots, gear, pets, and vehicles. That's the tenet of Play Clean Go. Clean your gear before entering and leaving the recreation site. That just means clean your boots and your clothes, brush off everything that you've been wearing for the day to make sure you don't bring any seeds or organisms with you to wherever you're going next. Stay on designated roads and trails. That just means, especially with the trail, you don't want to tread into pristine habitat and bring new seeds into those areas. Use local firewood, like I was saying before. And my personal favorite, plant native. You want to plant native species in your gardens and in your landscaping, and that promotes, native pollinators and native creatures all coming into your very own backyard, and you get to experience that. And it's a wonderful thing. Mother Nature will thank you for it. So, going back to the topic at hand, how can you help as a community scientist? Well, you can use apps like Seek and iNaturalist, which I will go into shortly, to explore species in your own backyard. You can identify invasive species of concern in your region, and you can report invasive species to the iNaturalist database to provide data for scientists, which is really exciting, and it's really easy to do. So first things first, what is iNaturalist? Well, it's a database where everyone can observe and contribute to biodiversity science, from the rarest butterfly to the most common backyard weed. iNaturalist shares your findings with scientific data repositories to help scientists find and use your data. All you have to do is observe. So beyond iNaturalist, there's something that's tied to this that's called Seek, which is my personal favorite app to use on my device. Seek allows users to point their smartphone camera at any plant or animal species to identify them in real time. It is so cool, and I'm going to demonstrate it shortly. By recording and sharing your observations, you can create research quality data for scientists working to better understand and protect nature. So it's a simple app, it's free to download, and it's just so easy to use. You just need to make sure when you have Seek on your phone to create an iNaturalist account, and then link those two together, because this will allow whatever you observe on Seek to be reported to those data collection repositories that they were mentioning before on iNaturalist for scientists to use. And it's just, it's so easy. In fact, now it's time for a demonstration. Come with me as I demonstrate using Seek in the wild. And by the wild, I do mean my office. However, I do have some creatures just for you. Just give me 1 second here. New share. Here we go. All right. So once you have Seek downloaded to your device, this is what you will see. And you will be able to observe creatures such as, who do we have here? We have squirrels. The American red squirrel, obviously doing what it does best, which is repairing its tractor. And so you take a photo, and it gives you all this information. You can tap View Species. It tells you it's native. It tells you it's one of the 3 species of tree squirrel currently classified in the genus, I'm not going to pronounce that, known as the pine squirrels. Yada, yada. It is just fascinating stuff. And it shows you its taxonomy. It shows worldwide observations, its seasonality, similar species. Obviously, we have the eastern gray squirrel, the fox squirrel, the Douglas squirrel, all the squirrels. So let's have some fun. Who are we gonna ID next? Oh, I think it's gonna be a northern cardinal. See how quickly it IDs things? I just find that really cool. And again, it shows you information about that species. You can tap view species. It tells you it's native, information about it. It's also known colloquially as the redbird or common cardinal. I've never heard anyone call a cardinal the redbird, but fair enough. Anyway, so it's just, obviously you can see this range map. It's a very common bird, so that's why you see so many observations of it. And let's do a plant this time. This may be a little inaccurate because it's a house plant, but here we are. Who do we have here? A bird's nest fern. And we're going to use the new photo. And again, we get to learn about this species. It says native. I'm not particularly sure if that's 100% accurate. I mean, it is native in Hawaii, so technically it's native to the United States. But anyway, you can see information about this plant. And I'm going to do one more. We're going to do, I don't know, there we go, lavender. Obviously, this is not actually how it grows, but just for our purposes, there we go. So we have common lavender. This is from my garden, which is full of native species, except for a select few non-natives like this lavender, because hey, it's not invasive and it smells pretty good. However, I do encourage you to plant native in your garden. And again, you can learn about lavender. I mean, it will tell you about anything. If you point this at your dog, it will tell you about dogs. It will tell you about humans. It will tell you about anything it can identify, and it is great. And then, so the important thing to note is at the bottom, it says post to iNaturalist. So if you do use this app and you start identifying species and you want to help us see where those species are located and see their ranges, like imagine this lavender was an invasive species and you saw it in the wild. If you observe it, that will allow scientists to see where it's growing, how far it is outside of its normal range, and plan for management. And that's just the beauty of community science. All you have to do is contribute. All right, let's go back here. So let's review. First of all, what is an invasive species? The most important thing to remember is that an invasive species is a species that can cause harm to the environment, to human health. And that is the main difference between just a non-native and an invasive species. How can you help as a community scientist? Well, you can download Seek, you can get an iNaturalist account, and you can start walking around your neighborhood, or whenever you go outside in nature. Maybe you go on hikes, maybe you go to camp, maybe you go down the street, wherever you are outside in nature. If you see any creature, whether it be a plant, an amphibian, a bird, anything, you can ID it with those apps, and then you can report it to iNaturalist and help scientists learn about those species, where they're located, and if management needs to be considered, or at least we get to learn more about where those species live. And then what steps can you take to help prevent the spread of invasive species? You can practice play, clean, go. You can burn local firewood. And again, my favorite, planting native in your garden. So you can plant anything that's native to your region, your zone, and you can look that up via the internet. Or if you find a local nursery that supports native plants, make sure that you get things that are actually native to your region. Just do a little bit of research and you will figure it out, and it'll be really beneficial for the pollinators in your neighborhood and for your ecosystem, your local ecosystem as a whole, including yourself. You are a part of that ecosystem. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions or want to learn more about any of these apps or about what we do at Lower Hudson Prism, that information is in the description. And if you have any immediate questions, you can email us at invasives@nynjtc.org. Again, I'll put all this in the description. But thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you learned something, and I hope that you become a community scientist to help us better understand our natural world. Thanks so much.